Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, and thank you for joining APQC's October Supply Chain Management webinar, Innovating with Your Current Experts While Developing New Ones. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This is the Q&A tool located on the right of your screen. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them here and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a copy of the slides as well as the recording in a few days. Now I'll pass the presentation over to Andrea Stroud, a Research Program Manager here at APQC. She will introduce our topic as well as our speaker for today's webinar.
It's my pleasure to introduce Marisa Brown as our speaker on today's webinar. She's the Director of Research Services here at APQC. She oversees the group charged with conducting research and publishing relevant, meaningful content for members and our clients. Since joining APQC in 1996, Brown has been integrally involved with all aspects of fulfilling the organization's mission on behalf of its members and clients. Brown has led some of APQC's largest innovation and product development research projects and served as project manager, client manager, subject matter expert, and co-author of numerous projects and reports. Without further ado, I will now turn it over to Marisa to discuss the findings from research APQC conducted on leveraging experts within your organization while at the same time developing new ones.
Thank you, Andrea. So as Andrea mentioned, today I want to share with you some results from recent APQC research. All of this research was published within the past 12 to 24 months. And the big question that we really want to answer, that I will work on addressing in today's webinar, is how can scientific, technical, and engineering leaders leverage existing experts in their organizations while developing new ones to meet the innovation needs of today and tomorrow? It's a big question. And therefore, at the end, I'll provide links to additional resources that will help provide details on how you might look at answering it. In our research, APQC examined ways that organizations can grow and leverage their experts, and we're going to use the acronym STEM for science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines. As many of you are aware, there's a shortage of STEM expertise. In part, it's the result of demographic patterns with baby boomers approaching retirement. But the other reason is that the talent supply is just not keeping up with demand in certain STEM fields. So there's a huge effort to address the pipeline for STEM, to get students interested in school and then recruit them into organizations in these fields. However, it will take a while for that pipeline to pay off. So what APQC wants to know is what can organizations do now to make better use of the experts they already have to drive innovation? And then at the same time, what can organizations do to grow their internal STEM expertise, both by developing new hires coming out of school and also by taking mid-career people and developing them into experts? So why are we focusing on technical areas? I'll tell you there's three main reasons. There are three things that truly seem to set technical teams apart from other disciplines like general management or human resources. First, it's the nature of the knowledge. Often, there's a right or a wrong answer in technical fields, but the knowledge is evolving very quickly. And the right answer today may be disproved tomorrow, or the best practice today may be superseded next week. Also, the knowledge is deep. It can take decades to become an expert in one of these fields, and certain subsets of knowledge are industry or organization specific, making it even more of a challenge for individuals to master it. So in addition to the nature of the knowledge, is the nature of the work. In technical areas, there's quite often a high consequence of failure. If a product is developed incorrectly or designed wrong, people can get hurt, people can even die. There may be a damage to the environment, or the organization could lose money. So we're really looking at high consequences of failure while the work is being conducted, often in globally dispersed teams. So you have a finite number of experts in each discipline trying to serve the world in a very global sense. So the nature of the knowledge, the nature of the work, and then lastly, the nature of technical teams. Now this is the fun part. And what's special about technical teams came out of what we see came out of the interviews APQC conducted. So you may agree with some of these points, and you may disagree with some. First, we see that technical teams often value face-to-face interaction and problem solving. They tend to get more value out of wrestling with these thorny technical issues in person than other groups often do. We see in technical teams a very low tolerance for administrivia. Many of these teams are very dedicated to their profession. And the team members want to be out there solving problems. They don't want to do things that they feel take away from that. And related to that, we see that technical employees often want to come up with their own solutions. And this can be a challenge when organizations want them to reuse knowledge and solutions and not reinvent the wheel. And what we're seeing, especially with younger people taking on these roles, is a desire to take on responsibility and do it themselves, which is great when individuals seize initiative, but you have to figure out how do you balance that with the high stakes, high reward nature of the work. So with all that in mind, any solutions that we talk about need to keep these characteristics in mind. In terms of who was involved in the research APQC did, we had representatives from technical functions, leadership roles, and support functions. And one of the biggest surprises for us was that there was no significant differences among how these different groups see the problem, the effectiveness of the solutions, and the urgency. We really expected to see some kind of difference, but the results told us that there may be a strong external reality here. We interviewed representatives from 15 organizations with large STEM workforces, and we surveyed over 757 individuals. One of the most fundamental questions we asked was, how do leaders see the need to increase the knowledge and expertise of STEM employees? Is this a priority for them? So on the screen, you can see the data that shows that overall, this was a big issue. 57% of the participants said yes, this is something leadership is looking at seriously. I'd like to point out that that number, 57%, is even higher in certain industries. For oil and gas, it was 72%. For aerospace and software, 75%. And in pharmaceuticals, 79% felt that increasing the expertise within their technical employees was a critical priority. And only 14% felt that this was something their organizations aren't really concerned about. So therefore, figuring out how to develop and make better use of expertise is an issue people are concerned about at the highest level and things that organizations are really grappling with in one form or another. APQC's research focus was not on STEM education or recruitment, but on the pipeline for expertise after individuals join an organization. And in that context, we looked at 3 categories of employees. First was the novices. These are people who are still learning and getting up to speed. They're often in the first 5 to 7 years in their field. The second group was the nexperts, which is a cute name for mid-career people, and we borrowed that from Lockheed Martin's knowledge management program because we really liked how it sounded. These are people with 7+ years of experience, but they're not quite at the point where they can be labeled as experts. They're the next experts, the nexperts. And then finally, the experts. And this is defined differently in every organization. For some, these are official subject matter experts. But in other organizations, it's employees with 15, 20, 25 years of experience who have deep tacit knowledge in a particular area. With that in mind, the central research question we wanted to answer was how can organizations leverage their existing experts to meet the innovation and knowledge needs of today and look towards the pipeline for tomorrow. One of our biggest takeaways from our research was that there are 3 knowledge gaps that we need to look at. The first is getting the novices up to speed more quickly. The novices, as I mentioned, are in their first 5 to 7 years in their fields. They need to develop their skills and their knowledge so that they can work autonomously, manage their own projects, or at least their own piece of projects, and really start contributing to the organization in a meaningful way. Obviously, for this group, there's formal training, but also giving them development opportunities and connecting them to a network of people who can support them is very important. The second knowledge gap is growing your nexperts. These nexperts are the people who really know how to do their work. They're contributing to the organization and often doing much of the work of the enterprise. But how do you get them the development opportunities they need to then become experts? And how do organizations provide support, something like a phone a friend option, for them to do some of the work that has historically or typically been done by experts, especially in light of many of those experts becoming increasingly scarce. And the third gap is new expertise. In many fields, the knowledge is evolving incredibly quickly, and the pace of change seems to be accelerating every year. I'm sure for many of you listening, that's the case in your industry. So how do you harness your experts and your nexperts to innovate and create new knowledge and solutions? And how do you process new knowledge, whether it comes from inside your company or outside from industry or academia, to make sure it gets to the people out there doing the work of your organization across the globe? On the screen, you'll see the 3 knowledge gaps we identified. So then we looked at what's driving the need. What's the reason all these organizations are really looking at expertise and how they grow and leverage their experts? And what we learned was that the most pervasive issues aren't around the workforce demographics. They're around the pace of change. The largest proportion of people were focused on rapid changes in knowledge and technology domains that are important to their organizations. So they're not as worried about the people changing as they are about the knowledge changing. They want to develop new expertise inside their organizations, figure out how to apply that expertise to improve all their products and processes, and then get that new knowledge out to the people who can use it in the course of their work. The second most common driver is also related to this idea of change. It's a changing product or project mix that requires new expertise. We talked to a lot of organizations that are dealing with a larger number of more complex projects than ever before. And they have customers who expect employees to have the knowledge across a range of products and services to be able to provide integrated solutions. So all of that complexity requires people to be experts in a broader array of areas and be able to bring together and synthesize knowledge from across the organization. But where is the focus? We see this clear need to develop expertise to drive innovation. whether it's transferring expertise from a departing employee or building some new expertise with emerging knowledge or technologies. But the organizations we surveyed are not focusing as much on experts who truly have the potential to become true experts in the near term. If you look at the orange line on the chart, you'll see that the novices, those again in their first 5 years of employment, are getting a lot of attention. Half of the organizations have significant or integrated efforts to develop STEM competencies in their novices. But for mid-career people, the most common response was, we have localized pockets of effort that are not strategic or coordinated. And there are a lot of potential reasons why it looks this way. It's much easier to standardize your new hire training or buy that even as a package. Also, the knowledge that your nexperts need may be tacit, and it may only be available in your current experts' heads. Also, it's many times harder to find time and availability for your mid-career employees who are doing all the work to spend time on development, and it's especially hard to find experts with enough time to teach them. And also, when it comes to emerging fields, the organization may not even know what those nexperts need to learn, much less have the resources to teach it to them. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying you should invest less in developing novices, but the research shows that organizations often get more immediate bang for their buck by investing in nexpert development, having strategy and dedicating resources to the extent that those knowledge needs can be known and addressed for mid-career employee development. Now, I want to point out that it's just not feasible for an organization to significantly invest in the development of all mid-career employees to turn them into experts. Every organization would find that to be counterproductive. There aren't enough resources to do that. So really the first step is figuring out where this type of intervention is most needed. Where in the organization is there the greatest need to develop your nexperts into experts? So I want to share an approach that APQC has found useful for identifying the knowledge and the expertise areas most in need of attention. APQC has a knowledge loss risk matrix that helps to pinpoint the areas and the experts to focus on. If you think about what knowledge or expertise is critical to your organization, in other words, without it, work can't or won't get done, then you look at that knowledge and you evaluate it on two dimensions: the likelihood of knowledge loss versus the consequences of knowledge loss. And then you look at the knowledge in the yellow and red areas of this chart. In the real world, you would probably have to go through at least one additional round of prioritization focused just on those areas. But if you think about this, if your organization addressed something in the red, is it possible that something in the yellow might move to green, or at least a less intense shade of yellow? So this is just an example of one tool we use, and in recent research we discovered that leading organizations use similar techniques. So now I want to share some of the best practices to help address the gaps and the challenges that we've been talking about, especially the transfer of knowledge to nexperts so that they're prepared to step into those expert shoes. Many of the best practices I'll share come from research that was a part of APQC's report entitled Transferring and Applying Critical Knowledge. I'd like to share a success story from Kraft. And this is about identifying and prioritizing the critical expertise. Back in 2012, Kraft Foods was really facing a knowledge crisis. They were going through a spin-off. Half of the organization was going to stay as Kraft, and the other half was going to become a separate company. And they had huge amounts of knowledge and expertise that had traditionally been shared across both parts of that organization that were now going to become separate. And they legally wouldn't even be able to talk to one another after a set date. So as you can imagine, this set off a rather urgent effort to capture and transfer critical knowledge. They needed to make sure that they would know this information and have it available to both organizations after the split to continue to support innovation and product development. They came up with a really great process that they've continued to use long after the separation of the two companies. And it begins with business unit leaders suggesting areas where they think it would be most beneficial to capture knowledge from their experience and perspective. Then the knowledge management team within the research and development group takes all those suggestions and prioritizes them according to 4 categories. How rare the knowledge is, its strategic breadth, or how important it is to the organization, how hard the knowledge is to learn, and then how hard the knowledge is to apply. So once the knowledge is rated on these different dimensions, it helps them prioritize what is most important for expert development and capture and transfer. In another example, also from Kraft Foods, what they found was that they needed to provide tools to employees that they would and could use in terms of knowledge capture and transfer for this vital expertise. When employees must navigate through disparate, time-consuming systems, it often dissuades them from seeking out the relevant knowledge and resources. So what Kraft did was they wanted to make sure that they had knowledge that was easy to access, visual, interactive, and used familiar technology, even for employees who weren't very technical in their skill set. So the organization creates knowledge books that capture all the critical information in a certain area, and they build them in PowerPoint because its employees are comfortable with that technology, and they also feel like they're not being asked to do something that's outside their normal flow of work. The organization also explicitly builds access to knowledge into its research and development process through its Innovators framework. And this framework guides people as they go through the process on when and how to search for existing resources. So at each stage in their stage gate process, there are questions that the individuals have to ask themselves along with actions. For example, when they're starting a new project, employees are asked or encouraged to ask, what's been done before and what did you learn? They then have to search the organization's database for documentation on similar past projects. They're seeking to find answers to the questions of what do we know, what do others know, and what is our intellectual property strategy on this? The third knowledge gap that I mentioned earlier is really related to applying new knowledge and innovations. In one example of an approach for developing your nexperts and your experts that can be used for creating and applying new knowledge, this comes from Ecopetrol, the largest Colombian petroleum company. They had a lot of success and have seen a lot of success using networks or communities of practice to develop and refine new knowledge and solutions. The focus of their networks is determined during very tactical sessions where technical leaders identify key knowledge challenges. And then they use these forums to really then bring together groups of individuals to innovate around these challenges. One community that they put in place saved the company approximately $2 million a year by standardizing the well abandonment process, eliminating the need to hire external vendors to perform this procedure. In another community that focused on well stimulation, they created a cross-functional process that historically had lacked clear ownership, but they put in place much clearer ownership and examined the process holistically and recommended improvements that led to year-over-year increases in the barrels of oil per day that were the organization's output. So this chart just shows the increase in production that they were able to obtain as a result of bringing together a community of practice of stakeholders from different functions inside the enterprise, training new professionals and applying lessons learned. In another example of leveraging experts to drive innovation, we looked at Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin has a fellows program that is really its method for managing access to expertise. The fellows program identifies top technical experts and makes them available to support programs, provide advice, and collaborate to solve the organization's most challenging technical problems. This program is overseen by the Engineering Excellence Team within their Corporate Engineering and Technology Group. The team is tasked with enabling engineering success across programs and business areas. To give you a sense of scale, there are 330 fellows out of 60,000 engineers, scientists, and technologists. So that's less than 1% of employees in that group who are currently designated as LM or Lockheed Martin fellows. It's not an easy process to become a fellow. An individual must be nominated by a vice president. Then there's a rigorous application and review process prior to them becoming a fellow. There's a vetting process as well that looks at the candidate's backgrounds and technical knowledge, as well as the impact that person has had on the organization. They look at the number of proposals they were involved in helping to win, successful program reviews, publications, and patent awards. So once an individual is named as a fellow, they serve a 3-year term, and then they must repeat the entire nomination and approval process to remain in the program. This ensures that the experts are truly those at the cutting edge of their field. In 2006, the program was redesigned and updated to better leverage experts' talents throughout the business. And now the Lockheed Martin Fellows are assigned to programs that need help, and any program can request a fellow to conduct a technical review, complete a risk review, or give advice on the direction of their program or a challenge they're dealing with. So essentially, these are internal short-term consulting engagements, typically 40 to 60 hours, that is funded for this cross-program consulting by fellows. A second piece of Lockheed Martin's approach is the LM Fellows Collaboration Network. And this is an intranet portal that has a limited version of the information from the Fellows program available for the entire company. Visitors to this portal can search for or connect with the fellow. It's an expertise location system where fellows often use it to work together with each other to address technical issues. And it includes success stories that show examples of how fellows have been leveraged across programs. And the third piece is an LM Fellows Conference. To the earlier comment I made about the desire for face-to-face interaction, every 12 to 18 months, Lockheed Martin brings its fellows together for a face-to-face networking event. They also invite Nexperts and rising technical talent as guests. They have speeches, poster sessions, collaborative meetings, and they brainstorm on workshops and share their expertise. The critical thing is that the Nexperts are included in this to learn from the experts. And then Lockheed Martin has also created Fellows Action Teams, or FACT teams. This is where they partner a fellow and rising technical talent to collaborate and share knowledge on a certain topic. There are currently 19 FACT teams underway. They have an ongoing relationship, and they have virtual plus in-person meetings at the conferences. So I've shared just a few of the findings from our research, and embedded in those findings are a lot of implications. But I'd like to focus now on some of the calls to action that came out of this research, specifically on the balance between novice and expert development and creating and disseminating new knowledge. So in terms of closing those critical knowledge gaps that I've been discussing, when bringing novices up to speed, we strongly recommend leveraging a tiered approach. In the bottom tier, you have content. This is vetted best practices, how-tos, all that kind of documented stuff. And the truth is that a lot of newcomer questions can be answered through self-service, but not if it's not documented and not if the content is so buried that no one can find it. So you have to make sure you have good content and effective tools, whether it's search and taxonomy or whether it's through communities, a more hands-on, in-person approach to help newcomers find what they need. But we also recommend combining all of that with a help network through communities of practice, discussion forums, expertise location systems, and similar things, so that you can use content management to mitigate the risk of novice development and help get them up to speed in as efficient a manner as possible. When your experts are a scarce resource, if that's the gap you're dealing with, you want to leverage tools to control the flow of questions to those experts. Perhaps you can get an expert to answer a novice's question and leave the expert free to deal with the really big challenges. So really focusing on tiered access to more experienced colleagues. Also, when your experts do weigh in and solve problems and help address challenges, you want to make sure that those expert solutions are documented and put back into your content repository. Because what you don't want is your experts answering the same question 20 times over. Using searchable discussion forums and social tools help make those solutions more reusable. And then finally, you want to look at structural overlays that you can use to consolidate experts and make the best use of them globally. Whether it's consolidation by discipline, by region, or by product line, recognizing the limited number of experts you have and then putting them in a situation where they can more easily transfer their knowledge to the next experts who can start to shoulder some of that load is a critical step. So when do you focus on which group? Because you want to give serious thought to how you're balancing your resources between novice and expert development. We all know that developing novices is important. But our research shows that investing in your experts may get you a bigger and more immediate payoff. So you really want to look at ways to give them the support and development they need to become the next experts. There are a number of knowledge management approaches and solutions that we've discussed that can be put in place for that. But when your knowledge is emerging, evolving, or unknown, and you're worried about how do you create and apply new knowledge, you really want to look at getting as much mileage as possible out of your current cross-disciplinary networks if you've got them, whether those are through communities or a fellows program or whatever your organization has in place to bring these folks together. And if you task those groups with creating innovative ideas and solutions, they'll often rise to the challenge. But then you want to combine that with what you can get from the outside, whether it's coming through academia or open innovation practices, whatever makes sense for your business, but leveraging external alliances combined with your internal expertise. And then using communities or other approaches to capture and transfer that knowledge down to the workers who will apply it on a daily basis is critical. So I've only touched the surface of examples of how organizations are leveraging their existing experts and how they're growing new ones, their experts, and getting those novices up to speed as well. I'd like to recommend some additional resources. APQC has a white paper called How Smart Leaders Leverage Their Experts that goes through a lot of this kind of information, and it's available for free for everyone at apqca.org/kb/STEM. And we also have an in-depth best practices report on transferring and applying critical knowledge. And that report is available in APQC's knowledge base. It's free for APQC members, and non-members are able to purchase it. It has in-depth case studies of 5 organizations that have really gone through how do we capture the critical knowledge we need and transfer it to those folks who then need to apply it. Thank you. I will now turn it back over to Andrea.
Thank you, Marisa. That was a wonderful presentation and shared a lot of interesting information, and we've had a lot of great questions come in, so we're going to go ahead and get started with some of those questions so that we have time to cover them all. And for the first question, if an organization is well established today and did not invest in innovation and developing leadership, sharing knowledge and expertise, and now wants to transform the human resources, how would they begin to overcome the challenges that they would come across as they begin to invest in these things at this point in time? So this is really kind of a change management component.
That's an excellent question. So if you don't have all these things in place, how do you get started? One thing that I can say is that individuals value that which they are involved in. So I would recommend not making it only a top-down approach where you mandate you must capture and share your knowledge, because people will rebel against that. We've seen organizations have great success when instead they create communities of practice or networks where there's more peer-to-peer involvement, but the organization sponsors those and makes them an official, explicit activity that employees are encouraged to spend their time on. We're seeing increasingly organizations are putting collaboration activities into their performance review process. It's not always mandatory, but more and more individuals within organizations are opting to put those on their goals for the year so that at the end of the year they can be evaluated against them. Another approach we see that works, especially in some more technical organizations, is gamification. So making it fun, and when we talk about gamification, APQC has other resources, we've written about that, but essentially you earn badges and you might get a little profile icon that you can put on the internal system that can indicate whether you're an expert or whether you're a good sharing employee or different things like that. So recognizing those early adopters and those individuals willing to step out there and share is always critical, is always a valuable way to incent involvement. And I could probably go on and on talking about some of our lessons learned from change management. And I'll just also mention that we put out a report on how to get change to stick, transformational change, and it has a whole bunch of information and suggestions on how to get that, how to make any big change really stick in an organization. And one last comment I'll make is that in some of this research we did and the case studies we looked at, those organizations were facing some external threats in some cases that made it an imperative that the organization change. So you could go as far as say, innovate or die, but that's a little dramatic. But in some cases, if an organization isn't capturing its knowledge and it's retiring employees or walking out the door, its potential long-term survival could be at risk. So in some cases, it's not an option. It's more a question of how will we do it, not will we do it.
And we had another question that came in that kind of relates to, you mentioned badges. How do organizations communicate who the go-to people are within their organization? How are organizations actually calling out or identifying who the novices are, who the nexperts are, who the experts are? Are they using portals? Are they using badges?
Good question. So how are organizations identifying the individuals who have this critical knowledge for those who are seeking it?
Yeah.
So one thing that we see across most of these organizations is they've implemented some kind of expertise location system. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, APQC has additional content and resources around that as well. And those that have been successful have tied it into their HR system, and that every employee's profile is on record, because in some cases that's how you get paid. But encouraging employees to fill out their profile and list their expertise. Sometimes, depending on the technology and the capability of the enterprise, it's not something that you have to fill in. The system will automatically pull from your resource planning system a list of all the projects and topics that you're working on, or the things that you've published are publicly available. So in some cases, searching to find people who have the knowledge you need is enhanced by systems that make it a more automatic population. But the experts are usually very clearly identified as a fellow or whatever the term is inside the company. So that's a smaller group, like I said, less than 1% at one company. Those folks are easy to identify. The nexperts are typically the organization's managers and directors, and those who have a lot of the responsibility for ensuring that the business gets done, versus the novices who tend to be newer in their careers. So I would refer you to some of the additional content we've got on expertise location and how organizations are handling that.
And when thinking about business transformation initiatives that are happening as far as developing experts and experts, many organizations have developed Center of Excellence to drive initiatives across the enterprise. How can an organization sustain these kind of Center of Excellence across the enterprise?
That's a great question. And one thing that I will mention is that APQC's research over the years has continuously found that you need to have two things in place for a change like this to be successful. One piece of it is in the flow of work. So I showed an example of one organization, Kraft, that had embedded in their product development process at each stage checklists and things that would drive you toward the critical knowledge. So making sure that this kind of work, so whatever your Center of Excellence is trying to promote inside the company, if it's capturing and transferring critical knowledge, for example, making sure that they embed their tools and templates and things in the flow of regular work that employees are doing. At the same time, the other piece of it is above the flow of work. Having critical junctures where employees have to stop and thoughtfully reflect on the lessons learned and the knowledge captured is an important piece of it. Because sometimes we get so busy in our everyday work, we forget to look up and see the bigger picture. So what we often see in companies is they have built in, whether they call them retrospectives or after action reviews or lessons learned, some type of an activity where when a project or a particular program has completed a course of work, they stop and they go through a series of questions to make sure they've captured what happened, what was supposed to happen, what did we learn, and then all that knowledge then gets put back into all those things that are in the flow of work. So the next project they do takes advantage of the lessons learned from the prior ones.
We just had another question come in. You mentioned that younger people are interested in taking on new roles in the technical teams, and how are organizations identifying what they still need to know as they take on more responsibilities and new roles? So sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So when dealing with novices in your organization, how do you deal with uncovering the information that they don't know or potentially need to know?
I think almost all of us don't know what we don't know. Sometimes that's, in fact, there's a great book that Carla Odell and Jack Grayson put out called If Only We Knew What We Know, which is sometimes we don't even know what we do know, forget about what we don't know, right? But to answer your question related to novices, oftentimes the gaps for them are related to the body of knowledge that they're working in. So it's a little more straightforward to create an assessment if they're working in a particular field of engineering or other spaces to see how their technical knowledge compares to what they need. collaboration with nexperts or other more advanced novices to ensure that they're not completely on their own is often helpful. It's a tricky balance because you don't want to squash the initiative and you want to have a fresh set of eyes looking at your organization's challenges, but at the same time you have to make sure that at all costs you're not putting your customers at risk in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes we see boot camps or training programs put in place that let them tackle problems and come up with solutions that aren't necessarily customer critical at that point, so that they get that experience as well. And you can assess what they know and don't know in terms of their technical capabilities. And for the novices, a lot of companies have very well-defined career development courses and training programs and things like that. And just one side note is we often see that it's not just the technical skills, it's the soft skills, the people skills, the project management skills, things like that that are what the novices need to be able to move up to an expert level, and not overlooking the importance of that is something to keep in mind.
So a lot of organizations using mentoring programs for those soft skills?
Yes, in fact, APQC is about to wrap up a project on technical mentoring and looking at how organizations put that in place. Because part of the research that we did, that white paper that I mentioned on STEM and how you leverage your experts, we looked at what are the approaches that are most effective inside organizations and what are the approaches that are most commonly used. So the approaches that are most commonly used tend to be your systems-based approaches, your technical solutions to the problem of collaborating, right? Those are easier to implement, but the ones that are most effective are your high-touch ones, which mentoring is definitely a high-touch model. And when your experts are scarce, how do you implement that? So that's what we're delving into in the research that we're doing right now, and we'll be publishing that pretty soon. Because if that's the effective thing, if those models are what's effective, then how do you leverage that in a way that is sustainable for a larger organization?
And another question came in. So the data presented earlier in the presentation show that more than half of the 750 surveyed organizations see increasing the expertise of STEM employees as a significant or urgent business priority for leadership. At APQC, have you seen organizations working together to tackle this priority and exchange ideas of how they are dealing with it, either within the same industry or across industries?
So I guess the short answer is yes. Because it is a common challenge, organizations are working together on it. And some of the content that I put up there comes from groups of organizations that have been working together. The project we did on transferring and applying critical knowledge was a collaborative study, and we had, I think, 18 organizations that went on the journey with us as we did the research, because they were all looking at trying to figure out how do we do this and how do we do it effectively and efficiently in light of the rapidly increasing rate of change and all the other things we've discussed.
Thank you.
Sure.
And if anyone has any questions for Marisa, additional questions, you can reach out to her. Her phone number has been provided, as well as her email at mbrown@apqc.org. Or you can also reach her on Twitter at mb_APQC. And we also have additional research that you can be a part of and participate in. We have 2 studies that you can participate in through surveys or be a potential case study candidate. The first is attracting talent to the supply chain field. Many of you know CEOs and supply chain executives, HR executives, and recruiters are not only faced with the pressure to attract prepared supply chain professionals, but also there's the difficulty of understanding how to balance the wants and needs of the professionals new to the supply chain field and that of the organization. So we're conducting a study on the organizations that are what they're doing to attract talent to the supply chain field through the use of surveys and interviews. This research will also examine what factors are motivating talent to gain an interest in the field and how organizations are going about attracting and retaining them. The second study that you can look at participating in is the product cost management study that we're conducting that focuses on how organizations are effectively setting targets for product and component costs. We're launching a survey to collect information on how organizations are using design and cost methods and balancing different requirements and elements internally, as well as who's involved in the process. And as always, participants who participate in our research will receive a free summary report of the results. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have interest in participating in the research or you're just curious about what we're doing, because we're always excited to talk to you about our research. We're always excited to talk to you about any of the topics that you may be interested in. And we also have a poll question of some upcoming research that we are looking at conducting. We'd like to gauge your interest. So the question is, which research, if any, are you interested in seeing APQC conduct research on? And the first option is big data, data analytics, procure-to-pay cost drivers, procurement and accounts payable work together to detect and prevent fraud, creating a culture of innovation, and improving transportation costs. And so this is a select all that apply. If any of those topics are of interest to you, please select any of the topics that are of interest. And we'll give you all a few minutes to make your selections.
Good.
Things like big data analytics and creating a culture of innovation are hot topics, and those are of interest to you all. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Maddie.
Thank you, Marisa, for that great presentation, and thank you, Andrea, for helping introduce and close our call. I just want to remind everyone that we do have our expertise page up and running that has everything supply chain related, product development, and innovation here at APQC. That's where we'll post upcoming research, just released content, upcoming webinars, and more. So be sure to check that out, as well as connect with us on social media. We're very active on Twitter. We were live tweeting today, so hopefully you got to see some of those tweets. And feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. I thank you, everyone, for joining, and please be sure to fill out our post-webinar satisfaction survey. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.